What happens when a woman who cleans the halls solves the equation no professor could? You ever notice how the people we walk past every day can know more than we do? At Milton University in Columbus, Ohio, students rush to classes, professors rush to meetings, and Clarice Daniels quietly mopped floors no one ever looked at twice. She wasn't loud, didn't bother anyone, always wore the same navy work shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, rubber gloves hanging from her back pocket. Just steady. You'd see her at the far end of the math building just before 7 a.m., bucket rolling behind her, humming something soft from a gospel station. She'd wipe down chalk trays and clean up after all-night study sessions. Most folks barely noticed. She wasn't invisible, not really, just part of the background. Like the vending machine, like the sound of squeaky shoes on tile. But the thing about Clarice? The floor knew her better than the faculty did. That woman had been mopping the same linoleum since 2009, long before half the current staff even had tenure. And she paid attention, more than anyone thought. She knew when professors switched offices. She noticed which grad students cried in the hallway after failing their comps. She even knew which faculty members left dry erase markers open so they'd be dead by morning. But all of that stayed locked in her head because Clarice didn't talk unless she had to, not unless someone really spoke to her first. On this particular Thursday morning, the air inside the math department lounge was stale with burnt coffee and bad humor. A group of professors was gathered around the whiteboard, laughing, poking fun at each other like they always did during department luncheons. Most of them had been there forever. All of them were used to being the smartest in the room. Professor Hollings cracked open a cold soda and tossed his half-eaten bagel into the trash. "Hey, Langston," he said, "go ahead and put something up there that'll give these clowns a headache." Professor Gerald Langston, tall, sharp-jawed, glasses always smudged. He liked a good challenge. He wiped the board clean with a rag and pulled out a blue marker. Then with a few quick strokes, he jotted down a dense equation. It took up half the board. Greek letters, multivariable functions, nothing you'd see in an undergrad class. "All right," he smirked. "Who's got the guts to even try this one?" Laughter bounced around the room. No one moved. Clarice was wiping crumbs from a nearby counter. She heard it all. She always did. Langston leaned back in his chair and turned slightly, catching a glimpse of her. "Hey, Clarice," he called, half laughing. "You want to take a stab at this one? Might get your name on the wall." More chuckles. She stopped mid-swipe, turned to face the board. Her gloves were off. Her eyes narrowed, just a little. Not angry, just focused. She said. And that's when the room changed. No one expected her to respond, let alone walk over to the whiteboard. Clarice set her cleaning rag down, picked up a black marker from the tray. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't hesitate. She started writing. At first, folks figured she was doodling, or maybe writing a quote or cleaning tip. But then her numbers started lining up with Langston's equation, step by step. Her logic flowed down the board like a waterfall, precise, controlled, elegant. The lounge fell silent. You could hear the old clock ticking above the microwave. Langston stood slowly. His eyes tracked each line of her work. A frown creased his forehead, but not the kind that comes from being offended. He was trying to keep up. Clarice paused once, double-checked a sign, nodded to herself, then underlined the final result. She capped the marker, placed it back in the tray, and turned around. "That should do it," she said. Calm, soft. No one clapped, no one laughed, no one said a word. But something had shifted in that room, something sharp and quiet, and it wasn't done moving yet. Clarice didn't wait for anyone to say anything. She picked her rag back up, walked over to the corner counter, and went right back to wiping crumbs, like she hadn't just cracked an advanced equation that stumped people with PhDs. Professor Langston was still standing. His soda sat untouched. Behind him, Professor Kane leaned forward and squinted at the board like the math would somehow make more sense if he stared harder. "Wait a second," Kane muttered. Is that right?" Langston didn't answer. His fingers pushed his glasses higher up his nose as he walked toward the board, slow and careful, like he was approaching something sacred. He reviewed each line, then again, then a third time. Professor Eldridge whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." Clarice hadn't written anything flashy, no theatrics, just clean math, logical, elegant, and correct. Langston finally spoke. She didn't just solve it. She solved it using a different approach than I've seen before. Silence. Clarice kept wiping. One of the graduate assistants, a guy named Brennan, finally broke the awkwardness. "Hold up," he said, eyes darting between Clarice and the board. "How did you even know what that meant?" Clarice glanced over at him. "I read." "Yeah, but, what kind of reading?" She shrugged. "Books, papers, whatever folks leave behind." Langston stepped away from the board. His voice was low, but his tone had changed. It wasn't mocking anymore. "Do you have any background in mathematics?" Clarice stopped moving. That question landed heavy. She turned to him and replied, "I took a few classes, a long time ago. Then life got in the way." Langston nodded slowly, but something in his face twitched. He wasn't used to being surprised. "Have you ever worked in a lab, done formal research?" "No, sir," she said, "just clean this place." You could see the wheels turning in his head, and you could see the doubt creeping in behind them, not because of her math, but because of who had solved it. Kane leaned in closer to Eldridge and whispered under his breath, "There's no way she did that herself." Clarice heard that. Everyone did. She wiped her hands on her pants, picked up her bucket handle, and turned toward the door. "I'll be out of here in 5, she said. But Langston stepped in front of her. "Hold on, Clarice. Listen, I didn't mean any disrespect. It was just a joke, you know?" She looked him in the eyes, calm, direct. "I know." He opened his mouth again, maybe to apologize or maybe to ask more questions, but she wasn't interested. Not in that moment. Clarice walked past him, pulled her bucket along the linoleum, and disappeared down the hallway. The room stayed quiet. Langston turned back to the board and stared at her work. The same board he'd written on for years. Lectures, theorems, puzzles. Now all he could see was her handwriting. Later that afternoon, a few of the faculty members circled back to the lounge. One of them, Dr. Marianne Brooks, wasn't laughing like the others had been. She was the only black professor in the department, and she'd been there long enough to know when something smelled off. "You really tried to clown her?" she asked Langston, arms folded. "It wasn't like that," Langston replied. "It was just a joke. I didn't think she'd take it seriously." "But she did," Brooks said, "and then she embarrassed you. And now what? Y'all whispering about whether she cheated?" Langston didn't answer. "She solved it. Clean. You're standing in front of the answer. Deal with that." But the doubt was already spreading across campus, across coffee tables, through whispered conversations behind office doors. Some professors were intrigued, others were suspicious, and more than a few were uncomfortable. But Clarice hadn't written just an answer. She'd written a challenge, and that board wasn't going to forget it anytime soon. Long before she was that janitor who solved the problem, Clarice Daniels was just a girl in Detroit with a notebook full of numbers and a mind that never shut off. She was 12 when she found her first algebra textbook in the trash behind her middle school. Water-stained, missing pages, scribbled all over with ink. But to her, it was treasure. She carried that thing everywhere. Didn't even have a backpack, just wrapped it in a grocery bag and tucked it under her hoodie like it was made of gold. Her mother, Laverne, worked 2 jobs and barely had the energy to argue when Clarice stayed up late, solving problems with a broken pencil on old receipts. "You're gonna be somebody one day," Laverne said. "Just don't forget who you are." By 15, Clarice was tutoring kids older than her at the rec center. By 17, she'd won a citywide math competition that nobody expected her to enter. She got a partial scholarship to a small technical college in Ohio. That was supposed to be the start of everything. But then Laverne got sick. Clarice tried to juggle it all, classes, a part-time job, late nights at the hospital. She missed 2 midterms her sophomore year, then another. The scholarship didn't survive the 3rd warning notice. She left school, came home, and started cleaning houses to keep the lights on. "I'll go back next year," she told herself, but 1 year became 2, then 5, then 10. Eventually, she took a janitorial job at Milton University. Steady hours, good health benefits, close enough to the hospital for her to check in on her mother before and after shifts. No one at the university asked about her background. No one cared that she'd once dreamt of finishing her degree. They just needed her to clean. And Clarice? She did. But she never stopped learning. Every night after her shift, she'd swing by the math department's recycling bin and pick out whatever old papers or textbooks were left behind, graded quizzes, drafts of dissertations, problem sets. She studied them, solved them, corrected the mistakes. She even wrote her own notes in the margins, like she was preparing to teach a class of her own one day. Her apartment was small, just 2 rooms, but her bookshelf was packed tight with secondhand math books, dog-eared and full of sticky notes. The internet became her university. YouTube lectures, open courseware from MIT, forums full of anonymous problem solvers from around the world. Clarice didn't need a degree to know she was good, but she knew it didn't matter unless someone else believed it too. And after nearly 2 decades of being ignored, she'd learned not to expect that from anyone. She kept her genius to herself, not because she was ashamed, but because she was tired. Tired of people being surprised, tired of having to prove what she already knew, tired of how fast people change the subject once they realize you're not who they thought you were. She told no one, not even her closest friend on campus, Terrence, the security guard on the night shift. The only thing she ever said to him that even hinted at her abilities was, "You ever wonder how many folks walking around here got whole lives nobody sees?" Terrence chuckled, sipped his coffee, and said, "All the time." That morning in the lounge, when Langston made his little joke, Clarice had every reason to walk away, but something inside her snapped loose. Maybe it was the way they laughed. Maybe it was the way no one expected anything more from her. Maybe it was just time. She didn't solve that equation to impress anyone. She did it because she could, but proving she was brilliant wasn't the hard part. The hard part was dealing with what happened once everyone knew. By Friday morning, the whispers had gone campus-wide. Some claimed Clarice Daniels must have memorized the solution from some obscure textbook. Others said maybe Langston had staged the whole thing for attention. A few just called it lucky guessing, but the math was right. That wasn't up for debate. What people couldn't wrap their heads around was that the woman with the mop and bleach bucket had outsmarted some of the most tenured minds at Milton University, and instead of celebrating her, many began trying to explain her away. In the faculty office, Dr. Kane shook his head as he read a forwarded email titled, "The Janitor Genius." He turned to Langston. "You know this is going to make us look ridiculous, right?" Langston didn't answer right away. He was still staring at the scanned copy of the board, printed and pinned above his desk. He'd gone over Clarice's solution every night since she wrote it, and every time it held up. Kane leaned back. "We can't just let this go. If she really did solve it on her own, fine. But if there's any chance someone fed it to her?" Langston interrupted. "No one fed it to her." Kane narrowed his eyes. "How can you be so sure?" Langston paused. "Because I ran it past Brooks. She said it's not only correct, it's creative. She took a different path than either of us would have." Kane scoffed. "So now what? We give her an honorary degree? Let her teach Calc 1 with a mop in her hand?" Langston didn't answer, and Kane, feeling the shift, dropped it, but not without muttering something under his breath about sensitivity culture and everyone wanting a miracle. That same afternoon, Clarice was called into a meeting with Human Resources. The email was vague. "Please report to room 204 at 3 p.m. for a personnel discussion." No context, no names. Terrence, the security guard, spotted her on the way in. "You good?" he asked, brow furrowed. Clarice nodded once. "We'll see." Inside the room sat 2 people she'd never met before, someone from HR and another from the provost's office. Their smiles were stiff. Their tone was corporate sweet. "We just want to make sure you're okay," said the HR rep, a woman named Celeste. "There's been attention and some confusion. You know how things spread online." Clarice folded her hands. "I'm fine." The provost rep, Mr. Dalton, leaned in slightly. "Ms. Daniels, I have to ask, that equation, did anyone help you solve it?" She raised an eyebrow. "Is that what this meeting's for?" They hesitated. Dalton continued, "Some members of the academic community are concerned that this situation is causing disruption. Faculty are being questioned. Students are distracted. We just want clarity." Clarice stared at him, calm, unflinching. "I cleaned the board. I didn't break it." Celeste smiled awkwardly. "Of course, we're not accusing you of anything." But they were. That night, Clarice walked the long way home. She didn't turn on music, didn't listen to her usual lectures. She just let the air settle on her skin and the silence wrap around her. She'd done the thing no one expected. She'd solved the equation. She'd proven herself. And it still wasn't enough. The next morning, she found a sticky note on her locker in the janitor's closet. "Keep mopping, don't get ahead of yourself." No name, no handwriting she recognized. Clarice peeled it off, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. Then she opened the closet, grabbed her gloves, and clocked in. That day, she cleaned twice as many floors as usual, not because she was told to, but because she needed to move, to keep from letting the bitterness settle. The following Monday, as she passed by the lounge, she noticed someone had erased her work from the board, just like that. Gone, but not forgotten, and not forgiven. Not by her, not by the few who knew what it meant, and definitely not by the person who was about to speak up on her behalf. Clarice wasn't expecting anyone to stand up for her. Not really. She'd seen how things worked. Folks smiled in your face, acted like they were impressed. But the second you crossed a line they didn't think you were supposed to, they pulled the rug out. And Clarice had stepped way over that line. She hadn't asked for attention, but now that she had it, nobody wanted to admit what they saw. But Dr. Marianne Brooks wasn't like the rest of them. She'd seen the way people shifted when she walked into a room, how they talked over her, challenged her just a little harder, acted like her degrees had to be double-checked. So when Clarice's name started circling the faculty lounges and group chats, Marianne paid attention. She remembered Clarice from years back, not just from the halls, from how Clarice once helped her carry a box of donated books to her car during a thunderstorm, from how she said, "I liked that lecture you gave on modular functions. That was clean work." Clarice wasn't just mopping, she listened. And when Marianne heard that someone had erased Clarice's solution from the board, she saw red. At the next department meeting, she didn't wait for the usual small talk. "I want to talk about what happened in the lounge," she said, loud enough to cut through side conversations. Langston looked up. Kane rolled his eyes. A few others shifted uncomfortably. "I'm talking about Clarice Daniels," she added, "the janitor who solved a problem none of us could answer." "She got lucky," someone muttered. Marianne snapped her head toward them. "No, she didn't. I went over her solution. It was right. And not just right. It was smart, deliberate. She saw an approach that I didn't even consider." Kane scoffed. "Marianne, are you really suggesting we make her faculty based on one moment?" "No," she said firmly. "But I am suggesting that instead of burying this and pretending it didn't happen, we acknowledge it. Publicly. Because the students already know. Social media knows. And it's a bad look for all of us that the only thing we've done so far is erase the damn board." Langston leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" "Give her a platform. Let her sit in on classes. Sponsor her if she wants to audit a course. Bring her into the math community, because whether you like it or not, she's already in it." There was silence. But not the stunned kind from before. This one was heavy, reflective. Langston finally said, "I'll talk to the dean." Clarice didn't hear about any of this until 2 days later, when Marianne found her finishing up in the stairwell outside Lecture Hall B. Clarice looked up, surprised. "Dr. Brooks?" "I wanted to thank you," Marianne said. Clarice blinked. "For what?" "For reminding them that they're not as smart as they think." Clarice gave a small laugh. "Didn't mean to ruffle feathers, just couldn't let that slide." Marianne nodded. "Well, you did more than that. You woke something up. And if you're willing, I want to help you take it further." Clarice leaned on her mop handle. "You mean back to school?" "I mean back to yourself," Marianne said. "I can sponsor your classes. I already cleared it with the department. You wouldn't need to give up your job. Just take one class a semester, sit in, contribute, if you want. No pressure, but full access." Clarice didn't speak at first. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her grip tightened on the mop handle. "Why now?" she finally asked. "Why me?" Marianne's voice was steady. "Because you've been brilliant in the dark for too long. And brilliance like that, it belongs in the light." Clarice looked down at the floor she'd just finished cleaning. It was spotless. She let out a long breath. "All right," she said. "One class." But that one class wasn't just the beginning. It was a warning to anyone who ever thought a mop meant you couldn't hold a marker. Clarice Daniels sat in the back of Lecture Hall D, just like she used to sit in the back pew at church, quiet, steady, focused. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't raise her hand to show off. She just listened, took notes, solved every problem twice, once the professor's way, once her own. By the third week, students had started noticing her. Not the uniform, not the mop cart parked outside. Her. One girl, Ariana, a freshman barely hanging on in calculus, pulled Clarice aside after class. "I hope this doesn't sound rude," she said, eyes darting nervously, "but how do you make it look so easy?" Clarice smiled gently. "Because I've been doing this since I was younger than you." Ariana bit her lip. "I'm not good at math." Clarice shook her head. "Don't say that. Say, I don't understand it yet." Big difference. Word spread. Students started asking her questions before and after class. Professors began inviting her to office hours, not to be mentored, but to collaborate. Even Langston, once too proud to admit he'd misjudged her, started leaving extra problems on the corner of the whiteboard during breaks. One morning, Clarice solved a challenge he'd left behind and left a sticky note next to it. "You're slipping, Langston." He laughed when he saw it, and that was the first time they really talked, not as janitor and professor, but as two minds who finally met at the same level. Still, not everyone liked what was happening. Some folks said she was a distraction, that she was breaking some invisible rule by being both cleaner and scholar. But the math didn't care what anyone thought. It held true, no matter who solved it. That's what Clarice loved about it most. One truth, no favorites, no politics, just logic. The dean eventually heard about her and invited her to speak at the spring convocation. Just a short piece about the value of perseverance and curiosity. Clarice stood on that stage in a plain dress and well-worn shoes, hands folded calmly in front of her. "I never wanted to be special," she told the crowd. "I just didn't want to be forgotten." People make assumptions based on where you stand, how you talk, what your job is. But talent doesn't come with a name tag. Sometimes, it's just waiting for somebody to believe it matters. The auditorium rose to their feet. Clarice didn't cry. She'd done enough of that in private. She just nodded once, softly, and walked off the stage the same way she'd entered. Humble, sharp, ready. She still worked at the university, still cleaned the math building, but now she was also helping teach problem-solving workshops, tutoring students who once ignored her, sitting on curriculum panels. Her world hadn't flipped, it had widened. Because when someone finally lets the light in, the brilliance that was always there starts lighting the way for everyone else too. If you ever doubt your place, remember this. Your worth isn't tied to what people see. It's tied to what you carry inside. Never underestimate yourself or anyone else. You don't know what people are holding inside. Respect goes both ways. And if there's something you've put on pause, pick it back up. It's not too late, not even close.